Matt here is my co-host for today, and he's requested you to be on so many times that I said I'd make it happen, and I made it happen.
Thanks, Matt.
Just a couple, yeah.
A couple dozen.
Thank you.
You kept asking.
So we have a few questions which we gathered from our listeners and from Matt and from my head, which go over the different games and projects you've worked on. Most of them are video game based, with, of course, big emphasis on Resident Evil and Mass Effect, as those are some of the big series you've worked on.
Yes.
So I guess we'll start off with the first question. You've been able to work with a lot of development studios, from Naughty Dog to Blizzard to BioWare to Capcom and many others. Is there a difference between working with each studio as far as the experience goes, and what are the differences between how they approach games as far as the voice acting department goes?
There's so many moving parts that go into any experience with doing voice acting in a video game. It ranges not only from what studios you're working with, but what teams you're working with, and, what type of character you're playing. You could be doing utility characters, where it's really based around sort of sound effects and things like that, or you could be doing something that, has a big story arc. And obviously that's going to have a big effect on the experience. Also, if you're doing facial capture, that throws a whole other element into your sessions. So for me, it's usually, most of my time is spent dealing with the director. So it's based more on that than the actual studio. There are definitely, I feel super lucky to have been able to work with, all of the ones that you mentioned. They're all incredible and put out great product. So I'm spoiled. That's part of the experience. But, the genre of the game, the team, BioWare had a very specific experience for me, because obviously, I was playing Jack and there was a huge story arc. There's also the, actually being in the booth, the experience of, are there pre-recorded lines that you're working with, like on a Veda, where you can actually hear what the actor that you're acting with has done versus, a director speaking the lines to you, to sometimes not having anyone feed you the lines. Sometimes you just read them. Sometimes they're just written down, and they're kind of what we call wild lines, where you don't have a lot of context. So the experience is kind of based around the nuts and bolts of that. And, obviously the type of game that we're putting together, that we're all working on. It also helps, with BioWare, Blizzard, companies like that, where I've worked with them before. And so we kind of have a rapport that's familiar. And so they'll know what I can do. I'll know more of what they expect. So that's always helpful, to come into the room and, know the people on the other side of the glass.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up on that one, which is about this one. So what are some of the games that you said you worked with the director? So what are some of the games that you said that you would say would be the most directed experiences, like where they give you the most instruction and you're able to work not only as a voice actor but as an actor in general?
Well, I think sort of the bigger roles you get more. For me, doing Resident Evil, doing Ada, I was also doing the facial capture. And so there was a lot of, and I was, it was a pre-existing character. So there were some factors that went into that, and the fact that I had little dots all over my face that made it a much more directed experience, because there was a real technical skill that was expected. So it wasn't just getting to, jump in the booth and make sounds and, jump around like I normally do. It was... you have to be more still. The cameras are picking up the dots on your face. So that was a much more technically directed experience. Things like Jack, where there is a large story arc, and for her it was a huge arc. It was more hands-on. So I tend to think that it depends on the size of the character. Sometimes, you're going in and people know you and they're like, do zombie noises. Do 6 in a row, and you're now pretend you don't have a lower jaw. Okay, now, one eye is hanging out or something like that. And you just that's the direction, is much more just the physical as opposed to the, psychology of the character.
So you talked about Ada Wong. So how did you feel reprising the role of Ada Wong from Sally Cahill, and did you take inspiration from her voice intonation for your version of Ada?
I've actually never. That was the first time I had. Well, not the first time, but that was probably the most specific role that I've taken over from someone else, and I am a natural-born mimic. So my personal trap is that I'll hear somebody do something and be like, oh, okay, and I'll just kind of grab that and hang on to it. And I didn't want to do that with her. Sally has what she does, and it's amazing. So I listened to what they wanted in the audition so that, they gave us a sense of where they were going. But then I wanted to bring my own take on her to it. And I also knew that going in, I was going to be working with, the director is also an incredibly talented actor. And I knew that if I sort of brought this, lump of clay that I had started crafting, he would be able to fine tune it and they would be able to get what they wanted. We had a really good rapport. And when I started to drift out of, maybe what they wanted to fit the game, then I got pulled back. But I also felt like they allowed me to, put a little bit of my own spin on it. So I was happy with the end result.
Okay, and then with Resident Evil, you're able to work with a lot of amazing voice actors, such as, say, a DC Douglas and so on. So what can you tell us about your experience working with the different people in that game? Because I know on that game there's a lot of really fun people. We've talked to DC before, and he's hilarious. Working with the different people involved in that game, did you have was it like a fun atmosphere, or since it was a zombie game, people were trying to be more dour and serious?
No, there's no such thing. I think I don't really know any dour video game actors. Voice actors in general are a pretty funny, gregarious lot, and in general, it's amazing to watch a lot of people go from that gregarious thing into dropping into what they're doing and becoming very serious. And because we didn't do group records, or at least I didn't do group records for Resident Evil, we were able to kind of have our fun before the session and then go in and do the thing. We did all meet up at the beginning and sort of review the characters and where we're going and the storyline. And that was fun. We just hung out and ate pizza, and, obviously there's phenomenal people. And I had the chance to kind of get to know the rest of the voice crew better. I did not know Laura Bailey before then. I think I had met Troy a few times, and I had worked with Matt Mercer. Matt Mercer and I are friends. So, it was great to know that even though we weren't going to get to record together, that there was, this crew of people that I knew and people that I definitely liked and enjoyed getting to know better. But we did record solo, so it was easier to sort of compartmentalize the fun and then the serious part of the acting.
So with a game like Resident Evil, where what's going on screen is usually fairly gruesome, were you ever surprised with how your voice lent to something that you saw on the screen? Did you ever see your lines put to the screen and you go, oh, that's what that was? Oh no.
You mean afterwards?
Yeah, afterward. After you record your voice and you actually see how it connects with the game, were you ever surprised with how what you recorded worked into the game, as far as what's depicted on screen?
No, I got to see what was going on. I got to, because I was doing the facial capture, I had a pretty good idea of what was happening. It wasn't a lot of surprises. I was amazed to see the final product. It's so beautiful. And so it was the enormity of the project was surprising to me, because I don't know. You got to see parts of it, but the end result was so spectacular. Just watching Laura and Matt's characters in when the glass ceiling thing falls in on them, and, the stuff with the helicopter coming around, those things, I definitely was able to step back and be sort of when things were happening, more so than I was when I was actually working on it. So that was a surprise of how grand the spectacle was. And it was nice to be able to see that in the finished product and be kind of blown away.
Okay, so now we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Matt has a lot of questions about Mass Effect, which is, well, a lot of people really know you from Mass Effect because you played Jack.
Yeah.
So, Matt, now it's your turn. Why don't you ask start asking your questions about Mass Effect?
Alrighty. This one's actually more of a general question, apparently. Of all the different characters that you've portrayed and whatnot, which one do you think you're most like?
Oh, which one am I most like? It depends on the day of the week, probably. But I feel like I probably had the most. I had the most instant rapport with Jack. She definitely was somebody that leapt off the page for me. I feel like I'm trying to work on, bringing out more of the other characters. I mean, as actors, we have all of these characters inside of us. And, it's about, some are easier to channel than others. But I think because Jack had such a great arc where she started out one way and really wrapped things up another way, I hope that I'm more like the end result of Jack. I feel like at some points in my life, I was probably Mass Effect 2 Jack, and now hopefully Mass Effect 3. But, I like to think that I have a little Scarlet Lake in me, a little Ada Wong in me, a little cooler, more sophisticated things as I am in this life longer, that I am able to clean up a little bit here and there. But I was a punk rocker in high school, and I have shared the same hairstyles as Jack, so she left off the page for me pretty easily.
Right on. So what did you use for your influence as how you approached Jack? I mean, you said she just kind of left right off the page there for you.
It was really my personal experiences in high school of, I think, being a bit of an outcast. I think I used, for Mass Effect 2, definitely my experiences in high school. I was an outcast, and I probably had a little bit of an issue with controlling my temper and feeling like the world was out to get me. Those things were definitely things that I drew on, for sure. And I loved the fact that they took her, they didn't keep her static the whole time, that they allowed her to grow and settle a little bit. But all of those, rageful scenes, I definitely didn't have to dig too deep. I think when you're a teenager, you feel like you need control and you don't necessarily have it yet. And so that was something that I sort of drew on. And I think Jack ended up, learning to channel the things that happened to her into something really productive. And I love that about the character. I loved that she started out as someone that you kind of disliked, maybe for the way that she looked, and through her journey, or through just scratching the surface, even in Mass Effect 2, you got to see there was this whole other person underneath with a really great backstory. And so she was a little bit of a tale of like, maybe don't judge people just because they're bald and tattooed. And maybe if they, use their biotics to blow things up, it's for a reason.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, as you mentioned a few times here, Jack goes through a lot of changes from the start of Mass Effect 2 through the end of Mass Effect 3. What did you have to do to show this growth and change in your portrayal of Jack?
So much of it was on the page. I was really lucky to have such great people writing Jack. I felt like when she started out, she really was that person. I mean, I remember reading, don't read the boards ever if you're an actor. But I remember reading people seeing the trailer for Jack and saying like, I'm going to shoot her out the airlock the second I can. I hate this character. And I was like, wait, you don't even know her yet. And she was written so beautifully that, you know, she really does have this kind of prickly exterior. And then you find out, and I think she changed a lot of people's minds. And then they took it to another level in 3 where, you know, and the DLC stuff where she really did get to be this kind of success story. And I didn't really have to work that hard because it was right there. And I also feel, you know, I feel this kinship with Jack. I feel like, you know, I went from being Jack in Mass Effect 2 to paying taxes and, you know, being an adult and being able to adopt a dog and things like that. So, it, you know, the circumstances aren't, the nut of the circumstance isn't that much different, I think, than a lot of people's lives. You start out, you know, you're never the same person every 10 years or so. So, yeah, it was right there.
What do you think of the design differences in Jack between Mass Effect 2 and 3? Like what she actually looks like?
I laughed because I really did go from bald to the Mass Effect 3 hairdo in high school, which is fun. So it was literally like, I was like, just reading my diary. Those BioWare people, like, they must have paged through a few photo albums and journals. I loved that they took her in a different direction. I feel like it's one of the things that are lacking in games sometimes is the functionality of what the female characters wear. You know, she's working at a military academy. She's training people. And I loved the fact that they gave her, you know, something that was like more appropriate for the job and also managed to keep her individuality. I mean, I would have been so bummed if they had, you know, given her a bob haircut and a suit, which would never happen, right? But yeah, but they managed to, you know, keep her individuality, still keep that punk rock vibe of hers, but also show that she had matured a little bit. And, you know, I believe in 3, if she's holding a gun and firing it, her boobs aren't going to fall out. So I like that. You know, I feel like in games sometimes you look at these characters and you're like, if a girl ran in that and like did a somersault and then, you know, shot an AK-47, her shirt would be up around her neck. I thought they did a great job with her. I loved her. I think she's just as beautiful in 2 as in 3 and vice versa.
I would agree. What's your favorite Jack moment?
I actually love before Jack comes on the screen. I love the build up to who Jack is, you know, because of her name and that you're not really sure who it is, you know, when they're talking about releasing her from cryo. I love that build up and then actually seeing her. And she's actually pretty petite and beautiful. So that surprise of who she is when she comes on the screen and just starts kicking ass, I love. And then I also loved, oh God, there's so many moments. I love some of her moments where she and Miranda are fighting, and I love, because I'm a big rescue dog person, I love that she rescues a Varen. Again, it's like the BioWare people looking through my journals. I thought that was hilarious that she ended up with a, you know, this rescue that's tearing everything up, and she just, you know, she doesn't see that. She just loves them.
Well, you gotta love Ezo. I mean, come on. So Jack and Miranda have quite the relationship, as you just mentioned. Do you think Jack would smear the wall with her?
In 2, when she first meets her, I think Jack would smear the walls with anybody. So yes, I mean, if you're asking, do I think Miranda or Jack would win in a fight? I think, of course, I'm going to say Jack. It's interesting though, because I will say this: one of my best friends, I detested when I met her. I think there's something to that, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And that, Jack hates Miranda because there's something there and you can take it for whatever you want. But one of my best friends, I felt the same way about it. I was just like, oh God, she's insufferable. And it's because we ended up being super tight. There was something there. So I think, the way this, I'm not going to do any spoilers, but you can judge for yourself how they end up, just in case somebody actually hasn't played all of the Mass Effect stuff. I think the reason that they dislike each other is because they end up really liking each other.
Cool. So if you were, Jack, if you were put in Jack's shoes, would you want to go back and destroy Pragia?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I figured that would be a pretty simple one. If you were crazy, powerful biotic like Jack, what powers would be most useful to you?
I like the pull function. Is it the pull function? I like the whole idea of being able to lift somebody up, kind of freeze them and draw them towards you. I think that would really come in handy. Is that the pull function, I believe? Pull?
Yeah, that's pull.
Pull. Yeah, I like that. I would take that now as Courtenay Taylor. As much fun as it is like blowing things up, I think being able to stop, lift, and drag whatever you want or don't want would definitely come in handy. So that would be my favorite off the top of my head.
Right on. And this is actually my last one here. So do you ever play the games that you voice in, and how do you feel listening to your own stuff?
I have to say, I have kind of come to terms with the idea that I am a crappy gamer. I have tried. I play some of them. But I generally, most of my characters don't seem to be in the beginning of games. So, and that's usually where I end up because I am not very good. I sort of lack the physical coordination. I spend a lot of time hunkered down behind crates, so I kind of suck. But I do sit and watch other people play the games. I find it incredibly distracting to hear my own voice. It totally takes me out of the game because then I turn into, actor evaluator and think, why, I feel like I could have done that better, or like, really? Oh, okay. I start critiquing my performance. So while I have played, Resident Evil and Mass Effect, I definitely prefer to immerse myself in the work that other people are doing, as opposed to listening to my own voice. I still have that thing, and it's funny because I've done this for a really long time where, although I'm not completely like the sound of my own voice, isn't completely jarring. And sometimes I'm like, wow, that's me. Hey, that's pretty cool. Because it's different sounding. Other times I'm just like, wait, ow, shh, be quiet. I'm trying to do something here. It's very distracting.
You and Jennifer Hale gave the exact same answer to that question.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she said, she would listen to her work or see the work stuff played, and she was like, oh, I should have done better. Oh, I did bad. Oh, why didn't they tell me about this then? Oh, no.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty standard. It's funny because when I do on-camera stuff, I'm not a big fan of watching what I did. And I always used to think actors were kind of full of it when they were like, oh, I don't watch my own work. And I was like, really? And now that I do get to work on camera, I don't feel it's much more about the experience in the moment for me. And I know that's going to sound totally cheesy, but it really is true. It's about getting to do the work as opposed to critiquing the final product. And I think some actors are able to kind of remove themselves and just be like, how does this fit in with the whole big picture? But for me, I am always, because I'm kind of a perfectionist and a nitpicker, I do have a hard time not going there. So looking back on being able to have the experience, I think about, I don't want to sully it with critiquing, Yeah,
I understand that. So I have the last few questions. So you already mentioned how you're not a gamer, but how did you feel to get roles in sequels to some of the biggest or greatest video game series of all time, such as Diablo, Command & Conquer, StarCraft, when you have Star Wars series in there? How do you feel getting roles in these giant game series that have been around for years and years and are so treasured?
Well, I would like to say that it's not that I'm not a gamer, I'm not a good gamer. And I know the title of gamer is probably not applied to me because sitting there and crouching behind a crate doesn't count, but I
did that
try.
for almost all of my Mass Effect 3 Insanity playthrough.
Everyone,
Because it's insanity.
your team is dying, and I'm like, they can fight for themselves. We're like, stand up. I'm like, I'm thinking, leave me alone. Because my knowledge of games beyond certain franchise, I don't have a huge breadth of knowledge on games. I am stoked. I'm always stoked to walk in. I'm always stoked to work. I love doing video games. They're so cinematic. It's like church for me, where I get to go in and play these roles that I would not be able to play on camera, that are so fantastic. I mean, video games are the kind of movie roles that you dream about when you're a kid. I don't think anyone, well, maybe not, I can only speak for myself, but I certainly didn't imagine myself, as when I was a child thinking I wanted to be an actor, being like, I'm going to do romantic comedies. It's always like space and fighting and, weapons. And so to be able to come in and get to do that, I'm always just beside myself. But then to get to come in and either work with somebody that you've already worked with and you already have that rapport in place, totally awesome. And to either revisit a character or to get to play more characters in that, it's fantastic. I loved walking in, and sometimes it's not even about the franchise. Sometimes it's about, working with a crew that maybe you worked with on something else, and getting to come in and see the writer or the director that is always just like, yeah, we get to play. They're bringing me back to the sandbox. Let's do this.
So I imagine coming back from Mass Effect 3 with a lot of the same people that were in 2 was just a lot of fun to just be back together again.
I was like chomping at the bit for 3. The last day, I cried in the booth. Caroline was directing from Edmonton, and it was really emotional. Like leaving that, having to put Jack down, was incredibly hard for me because I love her and miss her. And, you never know what will get resurrected. You never know when you're going to get the opportunity to work with these people again. So you're always hopeful and, you're always stoked when it actually comes to fruition. But you also like walking away from it. You're like, oh man, I don't think I've had a bad experience really working on any game for any, protracted length of time. And so it is like finishing a movie. You wrap it up and this great experience is over and it's fantastic. And, you get to look back on it and be so happy that you got to do it. But it's hard to leave them behind for sure. And then sometimes they surprise you and you get to come back and do stuff and you're like, ta-da, we're back, yay!
So since we run a Star Wars site, I have to ask some questions about the Star Wars games.
Sure.
And so you were able to work on the massive of all massive Star Wars games, The Old Republic, which apparently every voice actor on the planet was also in. Was there a difference between working on a BioWare game like Mass Effect, which has a more solid story and set characters and more of the motion capture, than a massive game like The Old Republic, which they brought in everyone. Every single person was basically in that game.
Well, so much of it, we do get to do group reads sometimes, but so much of it is solo work that it doesn't feel in the booth that much different to me. Obviously, for The Old Republic, I did some smaller characters, which I loved being able to play a character, sort of a high maintenance lady. So that was very different for me, even though it was a much smaller dose of doing it than say something like Mass Effect, where I went in and did multiple sessions on one character. So the experience in the booth was much different, but I don't necessarily know that it was different because of the material. It was kind of apples and oranges as far as one large character with a big story arc versus some utility characters that were more, short. I worked a couple of days on that.
Okay.
But I really enjoyed it. It was fun, and it was totally different than working on Juhani. It was when I did Knights of the Old Republic. That was one of the first games I did, so it was a much different experience. I was much more, the stakes were very high in my mind, and I was a total newbie. And so walking into the Old Republic was like, oh yeah, I know this is going to be fun. It was just a lighter experience.
How do you feel being a part of the galaxy far, far away, both in KOTOR and in the Old Republic?
I mean, awesome. It's an amazing franchise. And honestly, I used to teach fitness classes at the ranch in Marin when I was younger.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I remember walking through there and being like, I'm going to work for George Lucas one day. I don't know how, but I'm going to do something. I'm going to do some acting. And I wasn't a working actor at the time. I wasn't even, I think I was, studying a little bit. So being able to come back, it was just a personal goal for me. And so I was thrilled. On top of just the fact that it's like the Star Wars franchise, for me personally, I was like, okay, yeah, I met that goal.
So I guess the last question about this one, because we need to wrap it up, is so you already mentioned how you love returning to Star Wars. So this one's about tour itself. A lot of people didn't necessarily see the Old Republic as a suitable sequel to KOTOR 2, 1 and 2. I differ on that, but how did you feel about the Old Republic continuing the storylines of KOTOR 1 and 2? Do you feel it was a suitable sequel or a third game? Or what was your feelings about the storylines they did in TOR as compared to what you did in Knights of the Old Republic, a decade ago?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is it was 10 years, I think. Well, not 10 years, but 8 years, I guess, between working on them. And I'm not really aware of the particular complaints about either game or the through line, so that's kind of a tricky question for me. I do know that it's always difficult to continue a franchise because you want to honor the original seeds of the stories, but then you have to take it in a different direction. Technology changes. You want to keep things fresh. You want to add things in, and it's really impossible to, please everybody all the time. So I feel like there's a lot of people busting their tails to make it right. And you have to know that something like the Star Wars franchise, you may not like one direction that they go, but there's so many working parts to that whole machine that there's going to be something out there that you like, I hope. And, for me, I think the fact that they can keep the enormity of this franchise, I think sometimes gets lost, that there are, so many areas that are all threaded together at once that I think people sometimes could maybe step back and go like, wow, what an amazing franchise this is. Unfortunately, because I'm not a huge gamer, I don't really know what the issues were with the storylines.
Yeah, they were silly people. Are you looking forward to episode 7 coming out soon?
I'm super excited to see what happens with. I have some friends that work for JJ, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I mean, I'm not so attached to it that I know it's hard when you're a super fan of something, and you see it with things all the time. I mean, even with like whatever Shades of Grey or something. People get really attached to certain things and they want us to go a certain direction. I'm totally curious to see how J.J. Abrams takes it, shapes it, puts his own stamp on it, but, keeps it in line with the rest of the movies. So what do you think?
I'm hopeful. I've liked his Star Trek movies. I think he has a good sense of fun. So I'm hoping they get it right. And I guess it all starts with the writing. Yeah, he's a good writer. So
like as long as that was the thing for me watching the movies as a kid is that heavy, ironic humor. I think if they stick with that, and he's great at that.
He likes having fun, and he's a fanboy.
He is. I mean, and I do think he did a great job with the Star Trek movies. So I think we're in good hands.
So here's our last question. Every guest we have on the show, we give them a chance to have the soapbox to promote any convention appearances, future games, future projects, movies. So we're going to give you the soapbox now to promote whatever you want to promote, and we'll listen.
Oh, I have something really good, but I can't talk about it. I'm so sad. You can catch me. I recur on regular show with Mark Hamill on Cartoon Network with a bunch of really talented people. It's a great cartoon. Let's see. You can follow me on Twitter. My name is spelled Courtenay. So it's Courtenay Taylor. And you can also go to CourtenayTaylor.com or my Facebook news page. And I usually post all of my up-and-coming things on Twitter and on the news page. So those are the best ways to both keep in touch with me and find out what's going on. And I love talking to people on Twitter. So please find me. Let's hang out.